All right. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you all so much for being here with us today for this Guesty virtual meetup on maximizing your high season potential. I would like to briefly highlight a few reminders before we get started. If you haven't already, please make sure you can hear us by adjusting all of your audio settings. Don't forget that you are automatically muted, but although we can't hear you, you can click on the Q&A box in the bottom of the screen to submit any questions you may have. If you do have to leave early or want to rewatch the session at a later time, we will be emailing you the recorded event after the session ends. I'd quickly like to introduce myself. My name is Matthew Olarsh, and I am the Director of Customer Success for the EMEA region here at Guesty, the industry's leading short-term rental property management platform. And joining me today are prominent thought leaders from the travel and short-term rental ecosystem. Please join me in welcoming Melanie Brown, Director of Data and Analytics from Key Data, Chris Carlone, Co-founder and CEO of Turnify, as well as Manoli Gonzalez, Guest Services Operation Manager at AngelHost. Thank you all so much for your participation today. In today's virtual meetup, I'm going to begin by sharing some of Guesty's industry data. Then I'm going to invite our panelists to share their insights on how to best maximize your high season potential. And that's following the presentations by each of the panelists. So let's dive in. According to our data, travelers are busy making their Easter weekend 2022 holiday plans, leading to double and even triple-digit increases in reservation volume compared to previous years. In the US alone, reservation volume for Easter weekend is 26% higher than 2021, 129% higher than 2020, and 30% higher than 2019. And in the United Kingdom, which is experiencing waning COVID rates with increased vaccinations, reservation volume for the same weekend is 42% higher than 2020 and just 12% less than 2019. The summer months are also already hot as travelers are booking their stays far in advance. In the US, reservation volume for the summer months is so far 98% higher than 2021, a whopping 222% higher than 2020, and 76% higher than 2019, just before the pandemic. In the United Kingdom, it's already 91% higher than 2021 and just 4% higher than 2019. And lastly, but certainly not least, on the other side of the globe in Australia, reservation volume for what is the winter season down under is 25% higher than the pre-pandemic 2019. What's more is that this growing demand across the globe is leading to average nightly rates soaring in the months of June through August compared to the previous years. In the US specifically, average nightly rates are at $461 per night. That's 17% higher than 2021, 33% higher than 2020, and 46% higher than 2019 just before the pandemic. Over in the United Kingdom, we're seeing average nightly rates at £236 per night, which is 62% higher than 2021 and 29% higher than 2019. And again, in Australia, average nightly rates are at 368 Australian dollars per night, which is 67% higher than 2019. Now, of course, these figures are subject to no small amount of change, and if the last 2 years have taught us anything, we should expect the unexpected. However, there is no question that this data is signaling an undeniable demand and growing confidence to travel despite the pandemic. And as consumers are now wholly familiar with the risks, many are now vaccinated as well. Following this glimpse into our busy future, as we all know, one of the most challenging aspects of operations during high season is guest communication, which can become extremely overwhelming, extremely fast. Fortunately, our guest communication services provide round-the-clock communication to guests so that you can focus on other aspects of operations that are just as crucial. The onboarding process is fast as comprehensive, so there's no need to hire any additional full-time staff during the high season. Our team of experts will know the ins and outs of your business faster than you can imagine. Our guest communication services team provides many different features, including prompt responses to all of your guest inquiries, a customized sign-off, and also prioritization of urgent communication. You can actually also utilize our guest communication services during your off hours only. We'll pick up your guest communication from the moment your team sign off, whether that be during evenings, weekends, or holidays. And that gives you and your staff the work-life balance that you're looking for. This is especially convenient for property management companies with properties in different time zones who may want to personally answer guest inquiries during their work hours, but don't particularly feel like waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning to tell a guest where they can find an extra blanket. Our off-hours options provide the perfect alternative for those seeking personal interaction with guests, but also the time and space to unplug. So at this point, I'd actually like to now turn it over to our first speaker, Melanie Brown, Director of Data and Analytics, Key Data, to share the latest data on booking patterns and travel trends, showing what property managers can expect from the next few months. And without further ado, over to you, Melanie.
So like Matthew said, I'm the Director of Data and Analytics at Key Data Dashboard. So my team tracks a lot of trends, we write a lot of articles, and we share a lot of information about what people should expect from the upcoming season and their particular market. So excited to be here to share some of those insights with you all today. So first of all, Key Data is one of the top providers of vacation rental data. We plug in directly into professional managers' reservation systems. We work really closely with Guesty, so we get great insight into both historic and forward-looking data, as well as things like owner stays and maintenance holds. So currently we're tracking over 400,000 properties around the world from over 2,700 lodging operations, and we integrate with 50 plus PMSs, Guesty being one of our top. And so some of this data may be slightly different than what you were seeing from Guesty. We work a lot in leisure markets and heavily in the US. And so some of the data points may be skewed slightly towards leisure. If you're really interested in knowing some of those urban trends, feel free to reach out and we'll get you some urban data. So this is kind of how most of the charts I'm going to show today are laid out. We're just looking at Q1 and Q2 for these top 6 countries. This year compared to last year. Obviously, last year may not be super relevant for a ton of markets where booking volume was still really slow, but interesting to see where it's picking up. So right now we're looking at paid occupancy rates for the 6 countries for Q1 and Q2 of 2022. So I'm not going to go through each of these individually, but just pull out some key takeaways that I'm seeing. Most countries had a really strong Q1 with occupancy rates higher than last year, which is great to see. Obviously, Q2 looks lower, but that's just because we haven't received all of our Q2 bookings yet. So don't worry, those bars will continue to rise as people make reservations. Q2 is tracking a little more closely to last year than we would have expected based on this Q1 growth. Spain is up significantly higher, as is Australia and Canada. England and Mexico a little closer to the previous year, and the US is down slightly from last year. So again, Q1 occupancy really strong, Q2 slightly less strong, but still growing in most places. And so the takeaway here is just to monitor changing demands. Obviously, there's been a ton of turbulence with the year-over-year trends. Make sure you're adjusting prices accordingly, and we'll get more into that later. So here's that same chart layout, but now we're looking at average nightly rates. Rates have really increased substantially in most markets. Some of that is an increased demand. It's also the types of units people are looking for. So again, I'd encourage you find this data for your particular units. 3-bedroom homes are probably doing a lot differently than 1-bedroom condos in a lot of markets right now. But rates were way up in the first quarter of this year. They're up Q2 as well, often at higher increases. So Mexico stands out as one of the countries with the largest year-over-year growth in the average nightly rates, but most countries are up respectively as well. Rates are increasing more than occupancy. Again, rates were up a lot in most markets last year. And so just encouraging people, and I'll say this again, keep a look at that balance between your rate increases and your occupancy to make sure you're not losing out on demand that's coming in. So keep adjusting those prices. Do pay attention to your inventory type, but rates are up pretty much across the board. Stay lengths are another thing that's changed a lot due to COVID and people working remotely and traveling different seasons. And most markets we're seeing stay lengths that are about the same, maybe slightly different than the previous year. So some of these countries still had some pretty strict travel restrictions at this time last year. So stay lengths were quite different than normal. Places like the US and Mexico, Australia, their stay lengths are maybe slightly different, but still in line. Spain and England a lot lower than this time last year. And again, you're going to see lots of variability between markets and inventory type. So make sure you're staying on top of your length of stay discounts and your day of week pricing to make sure you're optimizing rates for when people are coming. And then next, booking windows, another thing that have been really volatile. So that's the average amount of time between a guest making a reservation, arriving. We saw a lot of compression of booking windows last year. People were very hesitant to plan too far in advance just because we didn't know if we would be able to travel or if new restrictions were coming up or if cases would continue to spread. And so this year we're seeing booking windows pacing ahead of last year. For most markets, it's probably more in line with what you would have expected in 2019, pre-pandemic. And so major takeaway here in most markets is to not really rely on those last minute reservations as much as you did last year. People are planning kind of more in that normal cadence. And so make sure your pricing is adjusted and you're not really encouraging people to continue booking last minute. I mentioned this earlier, but in a lot of markets, we're seeing this year-over-year growth in rates is way out past growth in occupancy. And maybe people were expecting demand to stay really, really high from the 2021 growth, and that just hasn't materialized this year. So this specific chart, we're looking at the year-over-year change in rates versus occupancy for the Gulf Coast of the United States. So we're getting a little more specific by the number of bedrooms. So just for example, we're looking at one-bedroom houses in this blue dot. One bedroom units. The average daily rate is up almost 20% over the previous July, and adjusted paid occupancy is down 30%. And so we really, it gets a little concerning when we're seeing occupancy way lower across the board and rates way higher. We would just encourage you to not continue to increase rates so much that you price yourself out of the market. So we can only handle 25% increases in nightly rates year over year. So for so long before people start being a little less excited to book a vacation rental. So again, find this data for your inventory type in your market and make sure your prices are really in line with demand if you want to maximize your high season. Finally, we're looking at the year-over-year change in guest bookings per active property. Again, this is data directly from Key Data's customers. The top, we're looking at that year-over-year change from 2021. I'm just gonna, don't get lost in the data. I'm gonna try to break it down for you. But most markets, especially in Europe, we were seeing really strong booking activity for the beginning of the year. Obviously, we're way over 2021 for most of these months. So from January and February, and then some slight declines in booking activities. Still stronger than last year for a lot of countries. But I think just there's a lot going on globally right now, obviously increasing COVID cases in a lot of Europe, the Ukraine war, and then fuel prices and plane ticket prices are way up. And so I think it's caused some uncertainty and hesitancy to continue booking travel. And so we are seeing kind of an easing in booking activity and demand. Again, it's a good time to just readjust your rates and make sure you know what's happening in your market. But we are still way up over 2022. Obviously, that should read 2020. Obviously, it doesn't take a lot in a lot of countries to be way up over 2020, but we're not seeing quite that same fall off that we did a couple years ago in reservation activity. So let's just distill it down into some key takeaways. So for occupancy, Q1 2022 was really strong. Q2 is looking good, maybe not quite as huge year over year. Again, we're seeing that slowdown in booking window. And then the US is a little different than a lot of markets, but their demand was just so off the charts at this time last year, it's hard to compare. For rates, the average nightly rate continues to climb, obviously influenced by the type of units being booked as well, but do be careful not to price properties too high. You don't want to lose out on all those bookings. And then finally, reservation activity slowed in March, behind 2022 in a lot of cases, but ahead of 2021. I think those should maybe be flipped. So that's what I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melanie, for those wonderful insights. And we'll go ahead now and invite Chris Carlone, co-founder and CEO of Turnify, to talk about streamlining operations to help you prepare for the high season. Over to you, Chris.
So as we look at the incoming tsunami of bookings, as we call it. We want to make sure that you can maximize your potential in peak and minimize chaos. So on the operations front, I'll give you a little background about myself. I'm CEO of Turnify. Turnify is the only housekeeping management platform built by an actual cleaning company. So just some quick facts. We've cleaned for 1 million guests at this point in 42 cities across the US. We complete around 100,000 turnovers per year. Believe it or not, we have over 1 million photos of clean properties on our servers. And last year we made 309,000 beds. We serve clients in 3 ways. You can use the Turnify app with your own team. We can manage your housekeepers on your behalf with Turnify Plus, or with Turnify Pro, we'll provide cleaners and manage them day to day for you. So I've got 3 Ps here in preparing for peak season. I know it's sort of catchy, but the first P here is people, right? So during the winter, you'll see we look historically backwards, and you'll see some sample trends here on the bottom left. Chicago and Nashville have very sort of different peaks in which bookings go up and bookings go down. So in the case of if Chicago is blue and Nashville is red, the winter was comfortable. December and January, the team was fine. They weren't overwhelmed with volume. But then you start to see in the middle of February, volume ticks up for Chicago and Nashville lags behind about 30 days. So when I look at this, I need to make sure that my Chicago team is prepared 30 days earlier, which may mean adding headcount, ensuring my vendors are ready, that sort of thing. And only by looking backwards can I understand that another 60 days after that, the volume is going to be up 3-fold, right? So is the team going to be overwhelmed? The way that we quantify this is on a ratio, right? So in Turnify land, our housekeepers can handle 4 units full-time all year long, no matter what the season is, for every 1 housekeeper. And right, this is sort of the average. So we're talking 1 to 3 bedroom listings, not the anomalies. So your ratio may be different, but I understand that if I have 40 units that start next week, I need 10 housekeepers. That's my baseline. So when you look at historicals, understand what your baseline is. And then from there, you can look at the forecast to say, all right, my booking volume is going to triple. I may need a few extra staff members to support that. And then once we look forward, right, so we've looked at historicals, we've determined our ratio, we're going to look forward, and you'll see on the bottom right, this is a screenshot of the Turnify app. So for me, when I look forward, the Turnify app automatically pulls in all of the bookings from Guesty and automatically schedules them for housekeepers. So in this screen, you'll see that, my sample data here, I've got 749 cleans that are unaccounted for, right? I'm short on headcount for the busy season. So this is a 2-click way for me to understand I have 100,000 turns over the course of the next 8 months. 749 are unaccounted for. I may need 1 extra staff member in Chicago and Nashville, for example. So look backwards, understand what your baseline is, and then look forward to forecast your turns to make sure you can confirm those assumptions to say, all right, my 10 housekeepers can support my 40 listings through the high season. It's confirmed with my software or my forecasts. So after we look at your people, we want to look at your process, right? So nobody wants to be the guy on the right sitting there with your coffee and everything's exploding and you're like, this is fine. So understanding what your process is, which may mean that looking at your team's bandwidth, right? If you have an inspector whose job it is to produce high quality reviews, but that inspector is sitting at a computer scheduling for 50% of their week, they've only got 50% of their bandwidth to focus on inspections and quality, right? It's sort of a mismatch there. So you want to map your process to A, understand, is the process working, right? How many steps are in my process? And B, am I getting the most output from my team's input, which may mean refocusing some of those tasks. So in this case, you'll see that when I map my process, a guest request for an extra towel takes 7 steps to get to a housekeeper and then goes back 7 steps. So even if in my mind, I have the greatest process on earth to handle a guest request, when the volume of bookings ticks up, the requests go up and quality declines, right? So we want to map this process to say, okay, it shouldn't take 7 steps to get a guest a towel. This could cause a huge bottleneck for us. Additionally, if we look at other items that are requiring more input for less output, we'll go back to the example again of a housekeeping supervisor, right? Is your housekeeping supervisor scheduling for 3 hours per day? They shouldn't be, right? In most cases, they shouldn't be. You should have technology that does that or a scheduler that does that, because your housekeeping supervisor is going to provide you the golden reviews that you're after. provide you the headcount needed to staff those listings and support that volume. And then historically, where did bottlenecks occur? So once you've mapped your process, understand who should be where did a bottleneck occur? So if it historically took 7 hours to get a guest request resolved, once you map your process, you may go into your SMS system or your ticketing system and understand that 85% of those requests came in from 9 p.m. to midnight, and there's only one person on shift, right? So we may need to adjust that process, add someone else to that shift. Let's get rid of that bottleneck now. It's going to be a lot more difficult to try to work through that when we're in the high season rather than before it. And product-wise, right? So you've got your people, we've got my processes. Now, which products will support this? In our case, we always look to consolidate systems. So Turnify only exists today because years ago, we used 21 softwares to manage the day-to-day of 500 properties, right? And it was absolute madness. So which of your systems can be consolidated? Do you use, for communication, do you use SMS, call, WhatsApp, Slack, and email? So you have 16 outputs and 16 inputs, and it's sort of chaotic. Or do you have 2 channels in which you can make most efficient use of your communication? So looking at your goals versus your technology, it's funny because property managers will come to us and say, I have 5 listings and next year I'll have 500. And we say, that's awesome, we love it, but how do you handle your schedule? And they'll say something like, well, we have it in Excel. And it's a total mismatch, right? So you want to make sure that if you have 5 units today and your goal is 500 units, your processes and your tech match that. The way to measure that is to say to yourself, if someone was to come to me today, a real estate investor, and bring me 500 units that need management starting tomorrow, does everything explode? Does anything explode? Right? And that's a good way to measure that. So make sure that your technology that you have today matches your goals for the future, even though you may not be there yet in the volume of your inventory. So for us, we look at a core stack in 3 ways: communication, scheduling, and tracking. So you'll see our sample stack on the right, which is 3 years ago, we used 21 softwares. Now, today, we use 4. Right? So we have our communication, which is Slack, plugged into front app. Guesty pulls all the checkout data. Guesty also handles the pricing and guest communication on the front end. And then in the Turnify app, we handle all of the cleanings, damage reports, inventory, that sort of thing. So essentially, we're at a point now where if all of the other systems simply didn't work one day, this core stack can be used to manage and clean 100,000 times a year. All right, and that's the point at which you need to be at. So it's less risky, more efficient, and you'll be able to reach your goals with the current system rather than trying to reinvent the wheel when you have 498 listings. Next, we have an exclusive Guesty offer. So because you guys are at this webinar exclusively for Guesty, you cannot find this anywhere else. Turnify Plus is a new offering that we have. It's like property management, but for housekeeping. You can take your cleaners, plug them into Turnify. We'll manage them day to day on your behalf, and we'll give that to you guys for 60 days for free. So just use this code PEAK-WEBINAR when you reach out to us. That's what I have for you guys. Chris Carlone, CEO of Turnify. Send me an email, and thanks for the time.
And thank you, Chris, and also a big thank you for sharing that unique promotional offer with the audience today. We really appreciate that. And last but not least, I will now ask Melanie Gonzalez, Guest Services Operation Manager of Angel Host, to cover how Angel Host is preparing for the high season, including pricing strategies implemented and tools to utilize to handle that influx of guests, while of course providing a top-notch guest experience. Over to you, Melanie.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what we do and who we are, of course. First of all, Angel Host is a company that started around 3.5 years ago. In that time, we have achieved to manage over 500 properties in 7 countries. And our goal is to allow property managers and property owners to maximize their revenue and obviously their bookings by providing an external service. The numbers speak by themselves. In the last 3 years, around 30% is the outperformance of those people who have signed up with us. And there's a little bit of a methodology, or the magic steps as we call them. And it's 4 pillars that create this increase in revenue and optimization. First of all, we have to create a listing that doesn't only have beautiful photos, but also have specific phrases, keywords that are key into performing in the best possible way. So when you have a search term, your listing will appear on the first pages as we all want them to be. Of course, if the price is not right, then there's no point on having a beautiful listing if nobody's going to book it. So through the dynamic pricing and the revenue management team, we calculate those rates so that the listing is not only on the first page, but also booked, and more clicks get better results. Let's say that then in the next 30 days, there's no reservations and there's no movement. We have an optimization team. What do? They go into the listing and say, what can we tweak to make it look better, to make it have more clicks, to make it have more reservations? And finally, my team comes up. And my team is the customer service team, which are responsible for all the guest communications, from the moment a person inquires until the moment they leave, including the review, good or bad, we take care of that too. And when we come to dynamic pricing, this is a word that everybody's using, but not many people know how to use or what to do with it. So it's not about getting a lot of money, or it's not about getting 100% occupancy with $30 a night. So it's about the right price for the property that night in that season. You might talk about high season in the Caribbean during the winter and high season in the summer in Europe. But when you have properties in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, you have to always be ready for high season, because high season is now throughout the year. We have outside information that we can use to prepare those rates, external tools, what's the market doing, what's the competition doing. And if somebody else says, well, you are outperforming, there must be a reason why. So you have to compare what's going on in the local market or in the local area, and how can you improve your pricing and your performance. And then internally, we also have a tool that, together with the numbers we have in Guesty, is an interactive self-service tool. The customer service team has the empowerment to log into this tool, which is created internally, enter the name of the property and the specific dates. And if an additional discount is available for that specific stay within the next 20 days, 30 days, they have the possibility to offer a special deal to that guest. By that, you can close a sale quickly. And the workflows is one of the most powerful and amazing things that we have now in Guesty for guest communications. Not only we use the save replies, which you might or might not be familiar with. The save reply, is the templates that we have for every single frequently asked question. But then other situations might arise, and you might need other save replies to be created. We can create this in any language. Currently, we work in English, French, and Spanish, because that's the most important markets for us. And this allows the customer service team to have an easy and fast way of answering with the accurate information. After that, we have to automate the messages. But of course, we want the answers to be fast, but nobody likes to talk to a bot. With the workflows, you can create them based on the advanced notice, create based on the platform. So for example, maybe you want to send a reminder, an SMS reminder of the code, because people are flying and they don't have Wi-Fi and they didn't check their booking.com or their Airbnb app, and then they have an SMS reminding them of their access code. You can also upsell services. After 1 week stay, or even if it's a short-term stay, you can also offer mid-stay cleaning, champagne, roses, anything you like. And we've tried it just with one property manager in Mexico, in Riviera Maya, Tulum and Playa del Carmen mainly, and it's already achieved a very important result for them. Then you have to personalize, because not one size doesn't fit all. Every one of our clients has a specific request. They want to communicate in a different way. Some of them are like something more formal. And then for this, with this workflow, you can also create custom variables. Those are as specific as you like. You can describe the check-in instructions as detailed as you like. Turn right at the green tree and then left at where you see the little house with the black door. Everything you like, you can add it into the custom variables. Again, in any language that you like, because one of the best things about this is that you can set up a specific language, the preferred one for the guest, and all the communications will be sent in that one. And when you specialize a team, it's very important that everybody knows what they're doing. When you have a high demand, you don't want people to answer just fast just to get over the tickets. So we have clusters, which is a group of people dedicated to a certain region. talking back about the 9 to 5 work that we all want to have, we have people working in different parts of the world in their 9 to 5s ish. But what they do is they specialize. So with a unified inbox, you can have 3 or 5 people working at the same time, answering with a filter a specific region. So one person is going to be dedicated to Turks and Caicos, the other person to the US, and the other person to Tulum. And each one of them becomes a specialist. What is another advantage of that? That of course the client, the owner, the property manager know who he has to call or she has to call when they have a specific question about a reservation. And when you have a multilingual response, it's also important to have native speakers. You know, we all know what it's like to call a bank, you know, in a call center, and they all are called John mysteriously, but their accent is really not that attractive when you are actually frustrated because you can't use your credit card. So we have native speakers. We work beyond office hours. So if you're in the East Coast or the West Coast and you send me a message at 11 o'clock at night, somebody is going to be answering that call or that message. And internally, how do we make sure that the communication flows from one shift to the other? When you use your inbox, you can filter, as I mentioned earlier, and you can also snooze conversations. So there's always a follow-up. Say I tried to get hold of this person because his credit card didn't go through and I couldn't get hold of that person in my 8-hour shift, then I will leave a snooze note for my next team member to follow up on that conversation. Of course, also that applies for unhappy guests or things that are that require maintenance attention, for example. We can also snooze conversations to make sure that the local team followed up and then the case is closed and the unhappy guest is now a very happy guest. And finally, there's another very important aspect, which is now increasing the concern for property managers and property owners, and is the security, the fraud. Are they going to destroy my property? Are they older than I expected or younger than I expected? Are they spring breakers? So we can create the documents that Guesty allows you to send, which is the rental agreement, personalized with as much information as you like. And you can also create a digital check-in form, including their email address, maybe a photo with their passport or their ID, which will also encourage people to book with confidence and will encourage property managers to know that their property is going to be looked after and taken care of. And that's all for me. Thank you very much for listening. And it was a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Manoli, and for sharing some of those best practices you have. And of course, I must say, very excited to hear that you've been able to have so many successes as part of our partnership together. Great. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and move into our panel discussion. We will start with a question that will be addressed to everyone here. But we'll go ahead and start with the question for Melanie. And that first question is as follows. As flexible living, digital nomads, and longer stays continue to take hold, do you think we're heading towards a future where seasonality has less sway on bookings?
Definitely one where there's less sway. I think it'll always play some factor just due to things like school schedules and weather patterns in a lot of places, right? Like nobody wants to go to the beach in the Northeast during December because it's cold and windy and gross. And what we're seeing is it's really dependent on the market. Obviously, a lot of markets last year in the US saw these big increases in occupancy rates during the shoulder season, where suddenly their peak season was like 3 months longer than they were used to seeing. So in the US, like Lake Tahoe last fall was back on track with 2019. So they kind of lost that shoulder season extension. And then on the Florida Panhandle in the US, their shoulder seasons are still high. So again, it's really dependent on the market. And I think there's always going to be slower seasons, again, just to things like when holidays line up and weather and those sort of things.
Chris, would you tend to agree with Melanie, or do you have perhaps a different outlook?
It's difficult to say. I mean, look, the market dependency is always going to be there. There's nothing that I would want to say right now as a blanket statement across 4,000 cities in the US at least. But what I would say is be cognizant of what your local market is like. I mean, you really, really need to understand your local competitors. I mean, how you stack up, all of that stuff is sort of standard. So when it's market dependent, do your research and where your locale is, and you'll find your own answer.
Agreed. And Manoli, representing our property management company here today, what's your take on this?
Yeah, well, I think both Chris and Melanie have a part of truth on what they're saying, because as Chris rightly say, your market will dictate that. But it is clear that families will not only travel to Orlando during the summer holidays, but they will also travel there, maybe in the winter to escape the cold because they have a bigger house and they're working from home and they don't have to travel during the school holidays anymore because of the way COVID has changed our world.
Absolutely. Thank you all for answering that question. And we'll do one more round of questions for each. And we'll go ahead and again start with Melanie here. What can property management companies do to attempt to create high season bookings all year round?
Yeah, I think the first question is, do you really want to, right? It's kind of stressful and it's very hard on your employees if you're booked at your high season rates the entire year. Also, it doesn't leave you a lot of time for refreshes on your units or renovations. So that would just be the first warning is, okay, do you want to be at your peak occupancy rates all year? You may also have to drop rates so low to chase those high occupancy rates during the off season that it may just not be the right idea for your company. So again, Manoli mentioned chasing revenue and RevPAR as opposed to just occupancy. So that would be my word of caution there. And then also for the demand that exists during your shoulder or off seasons, it's got to all be about rates and marketing, right? Like make sure you're adjusting your peak versus off peak rates accordingly. And then maybe develop some cool marketing campaigns around, okay, the people that are traveling during the off season, maybe they don't have kids in school, maybe they're smaller groups and it's easier to get people together, and make sure that those are the people you're targeting for those off season stays.
Thank you. And Chris, from an operational standpoint, curious to hear your take on this.
Yeah, so I think, gosh, it's tough to say. I mean, to say that you want to have, I think about this from my own personal perspective, right? My couple of properties that I have locally, if we had peak volume all year, I don't want the maintenance bill. I don't want to be repainting every couple of weeks. I mean, it's great from a P&L perspective that, your revenue is high and your rates are what they are. But the other thing is, if you're achieving 95% occupancy at a super high rate all year long, like you're playing with the system a little bit. It's not supposed to work like that. And I think you'll find that on the other side of that, you've brought your rate so low, or you've included some kind of value add at your cost to bring those guests in, that at the end of the day, it may not be worth it. So I think the better way to look at that would be, what can I add to my listing that can incrementally increase my slow season bookings to sort of flatten out that curve when it's cold or when it's whatever, and obviously maintain the peak stuff. But yeah, it's a tough call to rock on a listing all year long at 90% occupancy.
I think Manoli would probably agree. I'm curious, what's Angel Host's take on this?
Well, it is true. There's you cannot go too low and you cannot force the machine. So it's you have to be comfortable with your occupancy rate. You have to be comfortable with the kind of people that will stay in your property, and you have to be comfortable with the revenue that you get. So if the revenue is not worth it because the place was trashed, then what's the point of having high occupancy if it's going to cost you more in repairs? And again, the maintenance part of it is super important also, to have a period of time where, like hotels do, we have to learn that there's a reason why they close the floor and they do the reno of that floor, because otherwise you will need to block that time off, because it's going to cost you eventually in complaints and compensations otherwise.
Excellent. Thank you all for your insight for that question as well. Now let's go ahead and direct a question specifically for Melanie. In recent months, we've been witnessing an uptake in interest, investment, and acquisitions in the field of data analytics in travel and hospitality. How do you explain this ever-growing demand in the ecosystem for database tools?
So in my view, it's really twofold. I think the first is just the industry has professionalized so much over the last 18 months. And so when these are multi-million-dollar decisions by investors or banks or whoever, right, they need that data to back up that investment decision and make sure it'll pay off in the end. And so that's kind of my first point, is just professional, and a lot of this means more data. Second is that the industry used to be fairly predictable, right? A lot of markets all the same. Here's your top peak season. Here's your booking window. Rates maybe go up 5%. And so we kind of knew what to expect. And then 2 years ago, everything changed, and suddenly we no longer know what to expect. And it's not like it changed to a new normal. It changed to this like evolving situation where trends like booking windows and stay lengths and rates continue to go up and down. And people respond to these new influencing factors about like, okay, well, what's the pandemic situation in the specific market? And obviously regulations playing a huge part. And so it's no longer predictable. So I think having data to track current trends and then maybe at some point be able to forecast what's coming in the next 6 months is just even more important than it used to be.
Couldn't agree more. And you know, as I have the opportunity to speak with lots of property management companies, we get very similar responses. Thank you. And now, Chris, question for you specifically. We're still very much experiencing the impact of the Great Resignation, as recruiting and cleaning and maintenance work of, as recruiting of the cleaning and maintenance workers has never been more challenging. How does Turnify help alleviate this urgent pain point?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, look, nobody's exempt from this, even us. I mean, it's hard. It's really difficult. You know, the best thing that I could say from a Turnify perspective is that when you turn your properties over to us and you select Turnify Pro, for example, we're staffing the cleaning teams and managing them day to day. So your headcount worries and hiring worries, they're no more. On the other side of it, though, from a sort of professional level, it would be to say, if you're an operator that is seeing this, you may have to get creative. And it's not to say that you're going to, beat the hotel down the street that started paying housekeepers $37 an hour. I mean, you're probably really not going to beat that. I hope you can, but you may have to get creative, in which, at a hotel in San Antonio, we have 3 separate teams that service a 100-unit property, and sometimes you have to get creative and do that because that's the nature of the market. On the other side, we can coach cleaning companies and cleaners on how to hire and how to make folks want to work for you. That's the other side of it, which is folks are leaving, but if they loved what they do or did and they're paid well for it, are they going to leave? I mean, maybe, but you at least have a shot in that case. So I think you understand what's the draw for them working for you. Maybe you tweak your job post a little bit, understand what the local market rates are. But in the case of Turnify, we've removed that burden from you completely.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing some of that advice. And now over to Manoli for a specific question. Angel Host is experiencing tremendous growth across the globe. What would you say are some challenges unique to international property management operations?
Well, first of all, it's understanding the needs of each one of our clients. So as I mentioned before, some people manage 200 properties and they treat their guests and their properties in a certain way. But also then you have a person who has a beautiful cottage or a house that wants everything to be taken care of like if it was their own. And of course, we have to satisfy both of them. And we also have to understand that the communications have to be accordingly to that. We can also give them advice on the type of market they should pursue, or the age group they can approach, or even certain platforms are more favorable for certain type of guests. We all know that Airbnb, even though they're the main market taker, we also have a lot of clients from VRBO that are certain age. So it's understanding a little bit of what our client needs and how we can put them in contact with the best fit of guests for that property.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Coming back around to Melanie, in this day and age, and myself included, we've all experienced some form of data or information overload in our lives. What would you say are the key metrics that you'd suggest data hesitant property managers focus on when they first start using analytics tools?
Yeah, so when I started in the vacation rental space a few years ago, one of the first articles I wrote was called The Big Three. I think it's still relevant. So it's occupancy, so how many nights are booked out of nights you have available, your average nightly rate, again, your average guest rent paid per night, and then RevPAR, which combines the two and looks at revenue per available night. So those are kind of big three. Obviously, they're related to each other. If your rate goes up too high, your occupancy is going to come down. If you're just chasing occupancy, but your rates are really low, you're not going to maximize your revenue. So those are my three recommendations. And then once you have data for your own performance, maybe for the market, you want to start looking at the pacing and pickup of those. So if you're trying to plan for your peak season in July, okay, like where are you at versus where should you be? And that's where historical data and market data comes into play. So you can obviously go down a lot of rabbit holes from there. But if you're not tracking anything and everything seems really overwhelming, which it can be, to start with those three indicators.
Thank you. I agree. I think this is a great starting point. Those three metrics we also look at quite frequently with a lot of our client base, and hopefully for those listeners that will alleviate some of the hesitation out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Coming back to Chris, what would you, in what scenarios would you say cleaning operations should be outsourced as opposed to being managed in-house?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's very situational dependent, but I would say that the point at which you should look to outsource falls into a couple of key categories, which is A, can you afford to continue to do this the right way, right? Which means that for every dollar that you're paying per hour in the US, you're paying another 22% in workers' comp and insurance and taxes. And can you afford on the time basis to keep time records for 7 years and manage a payroll? So if this stuff, again, is eating into your bandwidth, where 100% of your time should be focused on making guests happy and bringing in revenue, but now the payroll is eating up 50% of that, it's a losing battle for you. I would say absolutely leverage and outsourcing in that case, right? So if you can no longer afford to do it, which may mean time, cash, etc. The other scenario is when you look at your goals, if you want to have 500 listings and today you're managing those cleaners, that's sort of a mismatch. That model is not going to work at 500 listings, which means that if you're going to continue to insource or use in-house housekeepers, understand that that's going to come with a significant overhead. So while your sort of costs are lower on an hourly basis to clean those rooms, now you've got management, inspectors, you've got all of this sort of indirect cleaning costs that you'll have to bake into your rates that you set 5 years before you hired that. So understanding what your goals are, it really comes down to a cost basis and a cost benefit, really.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. And we'll come back to one more specific question for Manoli. Do guests in different countries have varying expectations from guest service and experience?
Oh, yes, indeed. I don't know. I don't know if this is a question you can actually answer truthfully without being banned. But yes, of course, you have to understand where people come from, what their expectations are. I'm Mexican and I understand Mexican people, we have certain demands, and also certain stigmas as clients. But of course, you have to understand where people are coming from and what that holiday or that stay means to them. So yes, it's very important to approach them in such a way. Not only, we know a lot of Eastern European or Russian families, when they travel, they like a lot of attention, they like a lot of luxury. You also know, Asian families, they're big groups of people. Perhaps, North American, whether it's from Canada or the US, they're more used to certain type of travel, and they understand now the difference between certain luxuries that you have in an Airbnb or a vacation rental or a hotel. While maybe older travelers, regardless of where they come from, they have different expectations because they're new to the vacation rental and they expect that the hotel service. So yes, of course, not only where they come from and the country they come from, but also the age group, I think is very interesting and important to understand.
Agreed. It's so important to understand your guests, the market, the demographic, and to make sure you can tailor your service and their experience accordingly so that they can enjoy. So it looks like we have time for one last group question roundtable. We'll start with Melanie. How can property managers transform this low season or end of the low season into an opportunity for growth ahead of the upcoming summer months?
Okay, so I'm back with another 2-point answer.
Great.
So first of all, it's a great time to plan for your higher seasons. So set those annual or seasonal goals for each of your properties, what you would expect them to make, put a little budget together. It's a good time to be looking at your own performance data and market level data, so you know how you're pacing and how you're doing compared to everybody else and what to expect. Good time to plan some marketing campaigns. And then second, we talked about this earlier, but make sure you're capturing the demand that exists. Again, a lot of people are still traveling in those non-traditional seasons. So make sure you're encouraging those people to book with you instead of booking with a competitor.
Fantastic. And Chris, what's your take from a cleaning and operational standpoint?
Yeah, operationally, the low season for us, think about it as the time in which you go to your storage and you fold all of the sheets and inventory everything. I mean, the low season is a great time to get down to that stuff that you pushed off to the side because you had a guest issue pop up or whatever it is. So I think, to transform the low season would be to say, what are my goals for this upcoming year and how can I then support them? Which is, I'm not going to get halfway into the high season and have to, like Melanie said, close a floor because I forgot to patch a wall. This is stuff that you should have done in the low season because you have the time to do it. The other thing I think about is operationally is take a look at your listing and understand how it is we can make this more efficient to turn or to repair. I mean, there's a certain paint that we just used in one of our rentals, which keeps luggage scuffs off the wall. Like that type of stuff is amazing. And that's a great low season project to do. So while you're not out earning super high ADRs and your P&Ls are exploding with new revenue, like that's going to pay off in spades when the high season comes in. So spend the time. Absolutely.
Agreed 100%. And lastly, Manoli, what would you recommend maybe from your own experience at Angel Host?
Well, I think it's important to look at your listing and think if there's any particular feature or amenity you can highlight. So if we are in the middle of a season where we're not attracting families traveling with kids that are going to Disney, perhaps the property has an attractive location for shopping, or maybe it has great internet, or maybe there's a particular festival going on at that time. So you can modify the listing to attract those people at that time and maybe get a different market just for that particular time, or maybe say, special long-term discount if you have 2 months where you know that nobody's going to come to the city because it's too cold. So there's always something you can tweak on the listing, which is a beautiful thing because you don't have to change your whole brand, your whole marketing. You just have to change the photos and change the way you portray it and the way you describe it to attract a different kind of clientele that is the mid-season or that's not the traditional person that will stay there.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you to all three of you, Melanie, Chris, and Manoli, for participating in the panel today. I'm going to go ahead and pull my screen up one more time as we start to wrap things up here. So just as we wrap things up, I want to make sure to invite everyone here to Guesty Vault 2022. For the first time ever, our industry conference is actually making its US debut in Austin, Texas. And myself, on behalf of everyone at Guesty, we really hope to see you there. We have a ton of special events planned. It's 100% worth it. And you can learn more about the event by visiting www.guestyvault.com. And in conclusion, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much for the panelists. We really do look forward to seeing everyone at the many upcoming virtual events we have planned for the short-term rental community, all of which will be posted on our events page at guesty.com. Please don't hesitate to reach out to meetup@guesty.com with any other questions you may have. And with that being said, wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you stay safe and healthy. Take care, everyone. Thank you.